Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the award-winning recovery podcast. Get in the herd. I don't even know our podcast name. That's a bad omen. Brought to you by the McShin Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. My name is Nathan Mitchell. I am outreach director here at the McShin Foundation, and I am your host today. Our special guest is someone, and I have known professionally now for almost 3 years, I think, at this point, or at least two years, maybe. And we've met in person once, if you remember. We met once in the before times, long ago in the before times, and we now serve on the Faces and Voices of Recovery Month Planning Committee. We serve on a sub work group of that. So Mariel S. Hufnagel, coming to us from New Jersey, my own home state where I was born. Welcome to the show, Mariel. We've asked you here today to share experience, strength, and hope, share your recovery journey, share with us what got you into the advocacy work that you do, and really anything you want. I've been so excited to be able to talk to you and to hear your story. I've only read about it. And so I'm really excited to have you. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. So happy to be here.
So, as I mentioned here, tell us, if you would, what your recovery, if you would care, share with us your recovery journey. The kind of like the structure of what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, as you would share perhaps in a 12-step meeting. And, really what we're interested, or at least what I'm interested in, is what got you into the recovery advocacy work that you do, and the mental health advocacy that you do, because it's so important. I know you're the executive director of an organization. The name is escaping me and I didn't write it down. I'm so sorry. Very unprofessional.
I think I'm disconnected. My screen just went blank.
We went blank too here. I don't know what happened, technical difficulties, but we're back, and we're back with better than ever. Mariel, please share with us your recovery journey and what got you into this.
Sure. I don't think my recovery journey or recovery story is terribly unique. But I'm happy to share it, and it's certainly my favorite story because it's mine. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a home of love. I did have some childhood trauma, though, and from the youngest of ages, I recognize and I remember feeling different, apart from, less than, and having this like desperate desire to have affection and approval from others, whether that was a peer group or my family or other adults. And we live forwards, right? But we understand backwards. So I don't know how much if I really understood that. But when I look backwards at my, at my life, I see all of these like desperate attempts from a very young age, way before picking up alcohol or drugs, to garnish and gain the approval and the affection of others. Which, again, we live forwards, understand backwards, helps me to sort of codify this understanding that, like, I was not okay in my own skin. I had pain and confusion and anxiety. And the way that I, for whatever reason, believed or learned, or both, that to fix that was, instead of looking within, it was looking without. Right. And I think that part of piecing things together for myself is part of what motivates me so emphatically normalize the talking about mental health. Right. Because had I at a young age had proper education and appropriate safe places to learn and talk about mental health, my trajectory might have been different. I I don't say that from a place of I wish or a place of regret. I am uniquely and completely at peace with every single piece of my journey, because I understand that, all of those instances and situations and circumstances, both joyous and triumphant and, terribly painful and scary and tragic, make me and make, who I am today. But I do think that motivates me specifically to talking about normalizing mental health. Because had I known, I was having mental health stuff, whether or not it was mental illness, who knows, right? But I was clearly having mental health stuff at a very young age. And had I had positive coping mechanisms, different ways to deal with that, safe places to talk about it, I might have developed different coping mechanisms and gone down a different path than continuing to look for the outside to make me feel better, since my insides weren't adding up, which eventually led me very aggressively to alcohol and drugs, to numb and fix that. So that being said, I ended up entering recovery when I was 21 years old. I'm not going to spend a super long time telling you about the first time I picked up a drink and a drug to the last time I picked up a drink or a drug. But I will tell you that alcohol and drugs brought me to my knees very, very quickly. I've been in recovery way longer than I was drunk or high at this point. One of the things that I always make sure to talk about when I talk about my personal recovery story is to sort of really emphasize that I was able to enter recovery at the age of 21, right? And another one of the things that living forwards, understanding backwards, that I think motivates me so deeply, and not from a place of regret, but a place of newfound clarity, right, around my own experience, was I didn't know what recovery was. I didn't know that people got better once they were addicted to drugs or alcohol. I didn't know what someone who suffered from a substance use disorder or a mental health disorder looked like. I had this very taboo, stigmatized picture of middle-aged man, trench coat, bridge, maybe or maybe not clothes underneath the trench coat. And I was like, well, that's not me, right? And so all of those all of those different pieces, right? And clearly I'm, absolutely one of the lucky ones, right? I was able to find recovery at 21, but perhaps if I knew that recovery existed at 16, I would have found it at 18, right? Like for me, my story is one where once I was exposed to recovery, very shortly after I was exposed to it, I was able to find it myself. And so I think that is one of the big motivators for me too, to make sure that people know what recovery is and that it's possible. And that's why I recover out loud so much. But so even though I don't have, 30 years of heartache as a result of my alcohol and drugs, I do have a very rapid decline very quickly. And I'll paint a picture for you of what that looks like, prior to finding recovery. It looks like homelessness. It looks like incarceration. It looks like mental hospitals. It looks like prostitution. It looks like, and more than all of those things, it looks like real desperation and dissolution and degradation. It looks like being stuck in a vicious cycle of not just alcohol and drug use, but tremendous pain and shame, and ache and heartbreak for anyone who ever cared about me. And it was very, very lonely, and it was very, very scary. And that is, what the years of 17 to 21 looked like for me. And I found recovery actually while incarcerated at age 21, after going to and absconding from a treatment center. And, my recovery has been very challenging the first couple years. And I say that because I also think that those are some of the things that have catapulted me to advocate so aggressively, because I believe truly that I am, in recovery still to this date through, like I often say, through grace and grit. And, I sigh because although those are a beautiful part of the equation, like, excuse my language, but like, that's a fucking shame that I'm in recovery because of grace and grit, right? And also at this point, I have enough sort of ability to look back and recognize that really it's a combination of grace, grit, and my own privilege. And I think that's probably the third component that propels me to be so active and so loud in my advocacy and so dedicated to it, because although yes, anybody can recover, right? And idealistically and theoretically, recovery is available to all. Practically, I know that that's not true. I know that not only do people not know about recovery, but there are tremendous barriers to accessing and maintaining recovery, especially if you are in a marginalized population. And I am, tired of recovery being this transformative, redemptive, anomaly. Recovery needs to be the expectation, based on the way that individuals are supported, both by humans and by systems.
That's amazing, and I love, because I know you outside of this, and I mean I know you in spaces where we've worked on things, and I see how dedicated you are. And hearing just a little bit of your story, I didn't realize that you had found your recovery in while you were incarcerated. I also found recovery while I was incarcerated. And you may or may not know this, but our biggest audience, Mariel, is actually individuals who are currently experiencing incarceration. We take these podcasts and give it to PayTel for free, and they distribute it. I believe they have access free in, I think it's 48 different jails and institutions across the country. And so we're now receiving people here at McShin who have seen us, which sometimes it's kind of weird. It's disconcerting to be recognized by somebody when they walk in the door and you don't expect it. But at the same time, it's really awesome that we're able to do that reach, because we're getting to 300,000 people almost in just the last quarter. 300,000 views, of the show. So, this is an incredible tool that we were able to really develop and discovered because of the pandemic, when we knew that our jail programs here, we couldn't do that anymore. And we knew we had to continue to put that message, because that link is so important. It's so important to get that hope. I didn't know there was a possibility of recovery. I didn't know what that was. And for me, early on, I didn't have a problem. Everybody else had a problem. You had a problem. You had a problem. The cop lied. All the things, and it really took somebody who had been in my shoes to show me that there was a way out for me. And it continues to be the case for me when I screw up and I fall down and I come back up. I love that you have your dog in the background.
Sorry.
No, it humanizes us, right? Like in recovery now, like my biggest deals are, do I take a shower at night? Do I take a shower in the morning? Do I take 2 showers? Like, these are the things that are complex in my life today, and I love that. So you've been in recovery since you were 21 years old. And without asking your age, what have you done as your advocacy? Because I know you were executive director of the Ammon Foundation. And are you still okay? So I was trying. Please tell me.
So I used to always say Ammon sounds like salmon without the S, but I digress.
I like that.
So no, I'm not currently the executive director of the Ammon Foundation. Unfortunately, the Ammon Foundation, which I was incredibly privileged to be the first executive director of and build into an incredibly impactful, powerhouse of an organization, closed during COVID. So starting at the beginning of this year, I'm leading a different organization that is is not directly in the addiction recovery or behavioral health space. It's a child welfare agency. However, as we all know, there is such an intersectionality between, foster care involved youth and parental substance use, as well as, myriad other causes, things like domestic violence and, alcohol misuse and, all sorts of other things that create the perfect storm around child welfare. So although I'm technically not in the behavioral health space, I'm not too far away from it. I'm not too far away from it. And it really is an incredible opportunity to look at how do we support children, child victims, some of whom are impacted by parental substance use, some of whom are impacted by their own substance use, and some who may not necessarily have been exposed to it yet, but are at a much higher risk for their own substance use. And that is not all that drives me. There are so many other things that I have an opportunity in this position to be involved in. But as someone who has, 10 plus years in the behavioral health space, it is, it would have been really difficult to go into something that was like, environmental justice or like a good cause, right? But that had no tie to, where part of my heart is.
Well, I love that. And I read that you were doing that, the child welfare piece, because, when we look at ACE scores, ACE surveys here, adverse childhood experiences surveys, and we look at that and we see the correlation. I mean, it's with substance use disorder and trauma, early childhood trauma, being in the field of getting at the root causes. I think that's so vital to have the experience to know what can happen. And I love that for you. And I love what you're doing. And, I have the honor of serving with you on a work group. And I joined, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, on this work group. And our focus, I guess it was probably 2.5 years ago, actually. I think that's when we first met, or right after we first met. And we work on normalizing and harmonizing language and all the things around what it means to be in recovery. And what I love about that is I didn't have a language of recovery when I first got here. I didn't know how to advocate for myself, yet alone advocate for somebody else. And so being involved in these spaces, I've been able to open my mind using the skills I learned in my recovery to be open-minded, to be willing, and to be honest, to then turn that into a way to help other people. And you getting out there and taking what you've done, your experiences, and now working with children, I got a lot of love for you on this one. And you're doing it in my home state of New Jersey. So you're from Central Jersey, though, right? Is that correct? Yeah. So I'm in South Jersey here, but I digress. So what is a typical day for you? By the way, Honesty Liller, our CEO, is watching, and she says dog rule, and I love that because but she also mentions, what does she say? 48 states, nearly 500,000 views, videos and completed videos in the past fiscal year. Oh, cool. I think that's pretty amazing. What does recovery look like for you in your day-to-day now? What's the hope shot? Do we get into recovery and then destined to a life of poverty and boredom?
So I would hope not, right? And before I get to on my soapbox about, barriers to recovery and systemic racism and all of these things. So I believe wholeheartedly, right, that, we talk a lot in a clinical space about relapse prevention, right? And I am not degrading or minimizing the value of effective clinical treatment, right? And having a treatment plan, an aftercare plan, and all of those things. However, my humble opinion, is that like the greatest relapse prevention is being able to live a whole, purposeful, and meaningful life, right? That doesn't mean that every moment is joyous and perfect and copacetic and like unicorns and butterflies, right? But that does mean, and I call these the 4 pillars of recovery. It does mean that people have access to safe housing, stable employment, continued education, and adequate health care. And I don't think those are just the 4 pillars of recovery, especially now as I'm venturing into, the child welfare space. I really just think those are the 4 pillars of well-being, right? We think about social determinants of health, and we look at, the value of community, right in the middle of all 4 of those things. And so earlier I had said that the first couple of years of my recovery was very challenging, and I was able to maintain my recovery in spite of them. Right. And so I just want to give a couple of examples of what I mean. After several years of smoking crack and a very severe eating disorder, and not being to the dentist, in early recovery, I had severely inflamed gums and was in pain all the time. And I wasn't able to get to the dentist because I didn't have insurance, and I couldn't afford to pay out of pocket for the dentist. And because it was so complicated to navigate the social services, space, to get on Medicaid and get approved and, all of these things, I just sort of suffered for almost 18 months before I was able to get to the dentist. And I don't say that looking for any type of pity, but I was able to stay in recovery in spite of that, right? That may not be everybody's case, right? And this is where grace and grit comes into place, right? There is totally reason to use alcohol or drugs to cope with that. The shame of it, the embarrassment, the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain. Like, it would be a no-brainer for somebody with a substance use disorder to try to not know how to deal with that and to numb out, right? And that's just one of multiple examples that I have. I tried to go back to school. It was incredibly challenging because I was out of state. I couldn't get the in-state tuition level, even though I'd lived there for years, because technically I was still a dependent of my mom. Like, all of these complicated, policies that became barriers to me pursuing education. Again, through grace and grit, I was able to finally figure it out, right? And then once I got there, I didn't have the life skills to be a successful student. I didn't know how to study. I was anxious and overwhelmed about money. I was unsure about my housing. I didn't have a self-care practice that was effective. And so what ended up happening is I ended up dropping out because I was too overwhelmed. And what that did was just solidified my own tape of self inner monologue of, you're not worthwhile, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything, you're not intelligent, you're a failure, you're not good enough, ad infinitum, right? So I was able to maintain my recovery in spite of that, right? And I have all of these examples where I had tremendous challenges in front of me that were mostly systemic, right? That were mostly, because there were policies that were not person-centered. There were policies that are, not informed by lived experience. There are practices that were rooted in stigma or discrimination, that I came up against all of these barriers. And I think it's worth saying I came up against all these barriers also as, a 21-year-old white cisgender female. And so living forwards and living and, understanding backwards, I really believe strongly that I have an onus and an obligation, and we, especially since I've been through it, but as a society, we have an onus and an obligation to really look at these things, to try to change, fix, dismantle, improve, whatever you want to call it, all of the above, so that, recovery just doesn't have to be so hard for folks.
Yeah. That's so we are in a lot of spaces where we get to work and look, together, and how different states are doing that same thing. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Recovery Advocacy Project. I'm a part of that nationally and in Virginia here. And we've just launched our platform, and a lot of what you're saying, we opened up listening sessions for the last 7 months now. I think 8 months now. We've had listening session after listening session to get the grassroots ideas, to say, what do we need in the recovery community? And one of the reasons I love doing this show and getting people from out of state is that to get different ideas. We had people on from Rhode Island the other day, and I don't know if you saw the show or heard what we were talking about, but they just passed 3 laws that the governor has now signed, and the hat trick, right? And the buprenorphine one wasn't even something I would even think about, because hasn't actually happened to me. And so when that, yeah, and which I'm now, of course, the idea is wonderful, and let's see how we can incorporate that. Let's do it, work on that. But it's again, having the different experiences, having everyone coming together, because I get what you're saying. Like I've had barriers to recovery myself, and yet I come at this from also a very loving, caring family as a cisgender white male. Who is only just now starting to appreciate that privilege of coming into this space. And still sometimes I feel myself battle with it, and I'm grateful that I have people around me who aren't, who can remind me without judgment, or at least help me to find why I'm wrong, or help me to think differently, because recovery is for everybody. Recovery is possible for anybody seeking it. And we are now challenged, I think, to, as people in recovery, I think we are now challenged to maintain our recovery by helping the next person. And some of us do it like, what we're doing here. We do advocacy work. Sometimes, we're all doing advocacy work in different ways, I think, everybody in recovery. And that's been the strongest thing for me to develop in my recovery, is how to better advocate, not only for myself now, but now for other people who don't have a voice. But going one step further, empowering and emboldening others to use their voices, or to learn how to use their voices. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to count people like you, people like, the rap people I talk to all the time, among my network, the people I look to who are doing the work, that can sit here and come on here and talk about, this is what I did in my active using, without being, without having to worry about whether I'm judging you or not, because I can sit here and tell you about the things I did, which may or may not relate exactly to what you're saying. And there's no judgment. We come at this space open-minded and willing to make some policy changes. What are you doing? How are the relationships with your family? And I do understand. So you are married, and you have a dog, and I know your husband painted the
2
purple.
dogs.
You have 2 dogs and painted the purple behind you. Things sound like they're going pretty good for you right now. So tell me, what is that like for you, family and all that stuff?
Sure. So, and it's so cliche, right? But in a lot of the rooms of recovery, they talk about like life beyond your wildest dreams. And when I didn't used to understand that concept, right? Because it was like, I don't know, I have some pretty wild dreams. I don't know how recovery is going to help me to get there. But what I've come to understand, right, is that what is the intention behind that is the life that I've been able to build since entering recovery in 2007 is a life that I didn't think I was worthy of. It's a life that I didn't know I wanted. It's a life that has all of these things that I didn't think were possible for me, or on the agenda, or that I'd be able to accomplish, right? And one of those certainly is family, right? As someone who is, a long time, victim of, severe sexual violence, severe sexual trauma, and a, smattering of very toxic, very abusive relationships for years. The concept of having a faithful, loving, equal partnership was like not even on my radar for a very long time. The same thing with, the relationships that I have with my mother or my sister or my niece and my nephew, or, etc. These are relationships and humans that I, harmed, definitely emotionally and spiritually, some physically, that I stole from, that I, brutalized in every way possible, and walked away from without any regard, and these are now like the most important relationships in my life, which again was so far off the radar of possibility, from the way my life looked before I entered recovery. And those are just two of the areas. The same thing, like I was unemployable.
Right.
Before I entered recovery. Like now I lead an agency with a multi-million-dollar budget. Like I had outstanding warrants before I entered recovery. Like now I'm on the TSA pre-check list when I travel. Like things like it's just so, and like it's just so different. It's just so different. 180 degrees in every area. And so when I think about like my wildest dreams, right, they're wild because they were things that I didn't think I was worthy of or didn't even know that I wanted at the time. And it just, it just keeps getting, and the last thing I'll say about education and wild dreams, right? So I already told you that, and I think that, I mean, education is the platform in which I really have been able to rebuild my life. I believe that education is second to none. When I say education, I don't just mean traditional higher education. I also think, certificate programs, vocational training, all of that falls under the way I define education. But my recovery, pre-continued education and post-continued education, is also 180 degrees different. So I told you that I dropped out of my attempt at community college when I was a year or two sober. What I didn't tell you is that is after dropping out or being kicked out of 5 colleges prior to entering recovery. And so in about 2013, I went back to community college. I went back with a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear about my ability to be successful, and a lot of self-doubts. However, since my first attempt at county college in recovery and my second, I had built a very strong community around myself, and I had developed some life skills, and some of the things that were plaguing me the first time that I went back to school were no longer issues. So I didn't, I wasn't worried about safe housing. I wasn't worried about a stable job. So some of those things which allowed me to focus on school. And what school did for me is it didn't just teach me like sociology and mathematics and biology, right? But really what school did for me is it taught me about what I was interested in, what I was good at, what I wasn't so good at, resilience, my abilities and my capabilities, my intelligence, what was interesting to me. And so I went from like a 6-time college failure to being asked to be the commencement speaker at my community college, to being given a full scholarship to continue my education, to graduating summa cum laude and currently pursuing my PhD. And I'm not saying that that needs to be everybody's trajectory, right? But like that is what's possible in recovery. with community, with support, and absolutely with grit and grace, but also with systems in place that support me and my success as a human being to thrive.
That's an incredible journey, and I think that I was laughing a minute when you were talking about getting kicked out of school, because that's a part of my story, and I don't know if I've got 5, I think it's 4, but I can sit here and think it might be one I'm missing, and it probably is, actually, because it was over 20 some odd years. But I love this. This is really empowering, and I want to go back just a second, though, to finding your recovery in jail and the tools and what related. How did that work, and what tools did you acquire? And what happened when you got out of jail, as far as continuing to build that recovery capital, essentially building that recovery capital to put you in place for now, and what it is that perhaps could have been improved on at that time? What was lacking, I guess.
Sure. So I think what was really pivotal about when I was incarcerated, and so let me digress for a second. I have very conflicting thoughts about the justice system and incarceration, and addiction and mental health issues being public health issues, and not I mean, needing to be viewed and treated as such, and let alone the years of a racist drug war and people getting ending up in jail instead of treatment. So I just want to put that on the table. There's a lot there. However, for me, I know that when I was arrested, which is May 7th, 2007, which is my recovery date, and I was brought to Volusia County Correctional Facility by the New Smyrna Beach Police Department, it separated me and removed me from a cycle that I was unable to break at that time on my own. And that separation allowed, which could have happened in a treatment center also, or a religious set, which could have happened another way, right? But again, I look at my life without regret and believing that every piece is in the place it needed to be to get me to where I am and who I am today. But that removal and that separation became the catalyst for me to be able to have some clarity about who I was, how I was living, and what I wanted out of life and my future. And that, for me, there wasn't this, some people talk about this incredible moment of clarity and this epiphany and, this surrender. And, that's not my experience. My experience, though, is over a period of time, while being behind bars, it gave me an incredible, I don't want to say wake up call, but it gave me the space. It gave me the space to have some self-reflection that became the catalyst for me wanting to pursue recovery.
That's beautiful. I just read your private chat, so I apologize. But I don't have, I can't change things. I keep my laptop here, but your advocacy journey, and how did you get into advocacy? I think we talked about that a little bit. But is there something you want to expand on there? Because that is such an important piece of what you do, and how we know each other in our spaces. So what got you into the advocacy, and all that education? You could be making a mint at a treatment.
So the only reason why I put it in the private chat is you indeed had asked me that question a couple of times, and you said it in the intro, so I thought it was important, and I felt like I had just sort of glossed over it to points that I felt were more important. So I just wanted to circle back, and I do think it is important. So the first couple of years that I was in recovery, I was very dedicated to helping others. That's become a cornerstone of not just my recovery, but my life and who I am and how I live my life. And that's also not just relegated to people with substance use disorder. That's just become part of the fiber of who I am. So that being said, I was very, very dedicated to to helping, especially other young girls that, pull themselves out of and find the same joy and peace and life that I was able to find in recovery. So as I'm sure you know, and as many of the audience may know, but also, and I forget after doing this for so long, many may not know, my dear, dear friend, Greg Williams, put out a movie, The Anonymous People, years ago. And with John Shinholzer, he was there. He was there. John was there. I got to give John credit, and Carol, and Tom Hill and Aaron Kacharsky and Pat, and all of these people whose shoulders I have had the honor and privilege of climbing on, and have absolutely laid the path and been an example, not just for me, but, for a recovery movement that sometimes we mint as new, but people like John, and the others that I listed have been doing this for 30 years, right? So when that movie came out, there was a shift for me about understanding my role in being able, or my ability in being able to help people. And that not for a second was what I was doing wrong. And to this day, I still am devoted to helping one-on-one young women or older women find recovery, on their own personal pathways. But what became clear to me was that there was micro impact and there was macro impact. And that if I really wanted not to change the world, which I did, but if I really wanted for everybody to be able to access what I had, that there were systems changes and perception changes that needed to occur. And that I had the ability, and in my heart, I felt the responsibility to take some of that on. And after that, it all kind of happened very quick, right? It was all sort of kismet and, right places, right time, right people. I had just moved to New Jersey. I, didn't have a job, I had a job, but it wasn't a serious job. I had a lot of time on my hands. I didn't have a lot of friends. I had this sort of newfound passion in getting involved in advocacy or community organizing or whatever. I don't think I quite understood what it was. So I, was looking for volunteer opportunities. At the time, my very dear friend, Aaron Kacharsky, was running the NCADD New Jersey Advocacy program, which, still, and I obviously am biased, is the best goddamn advocacy program that has ever existed, and is completely a pioneer in terms of the way that he brilliantly organized the state regionally and empowered volunteers, on all spectrums of the continuum, from impacted to families of loss to people in recovery, to speak out and advocate for addiction as a public health issue. And so I started to volunteer. He offered me an internship. They took a chance on me and gave me a job. Aaron left. I started to run the program, and then I applied to this new foundation, not for a job, for a scholarship. And they reached back out to me and offered me a job, just all of these incredible opportunities that have, allowed me to get my foot in the door. And I think if I can speak about my advocacy journey and my priorities and what's important, for a very long time, I was advocating and focused on stigma. For a very long time, I was advocating and focusing on lived experience at the table, which still are two of the things I'm most passionate about. It's almost as though I've done a full circle from starting with being most passionate about stigma to once again realizing the value of it, because, and I think, and this is meant maybe for those who have been more involved in advocacy or the recovery movement than people who are newly exposed. After being involved for so many years, I think I got tired of the stigma conversation because it was exhausting. And I think it was like, well, so many people get it, right? We've made so much progress with stigma. However, and that's absolutely true. But when I leave my bubble, right, and I have a conversation, or I listen to two people talking in the supermarket, or about a tabloid cover or something they saw on their social media feed, the stigma around mental illness and substance use is so deeply rooted that, like, I'm once again charged to make stigma my top priority. But my advocacy journey has been thrilling and convoluted and confusing and exciting in so many ways, and what I, from the White House, with Obama, to, a public access campaign with the governor that was, all over, New York, New Jersey, the metro area, like on the Super Bowl, like, to potentially more importantly, working one-on-one with new advocates and seeing this understanding of the value of their voice, right? Or learning a new skill, being a part of getting legislation passed, or, so many exciting things, right? And what I just want to share, because I know we still only have 10 minutes, and I feel like you've wanted to interrupt me several times with questions, there's been two big awakenings for me when it comes to advocacy that are really, really important. And the first was after I sort of had been doing it a couple of years, was this like mind-blowing, earth-shattering, trajectory-changing understanding and acknowledgement of my own bias around different recovery pathways, especially medication. And needing to separate my personal experience from as the gold standard for recovery, and educating myself and exposing myself to this concept of many pathways to recovery, and being in recovery when you say you're in recovery, and really learning what the different pathways are, how they might be beneficial for folks, how to access them, what the barriers are, etc. So that was one that completely, like, again, these two like mind-blowing, earth-shattering, life-changing moments for me in advocacy. And the second was a couple of years later, when I really began to understand my own privilege, the role that it had had in my recovery process, and how incredibly misogynistic and racist all of our systems are, and that that this discrimination, and that's what I'm going to call it, that this discrimination had been going on for years, and that I had been complicit in it, even in my advocacy, my well-intended advocacy, and that I had two choices, right? And really, I only had one choice, right? But the choice was to continue as I was, which was unknowingly causing harm and allowing myself to continue to be part of a larger problem, or I needed to take intentional action And, Dr. Condi, what he talks about when he talks about anti-racism, and I think there's a lot of parallels between racism and misogyny or the patriarchy, right? Is he talks about you're anti-racist or you're racist, period, hard stop, right? And really grappling with what that meant and what that looked like and what that called me to do and say moving forward. And so, in my advocacy journey, those two things have been the most defining awakenings or understandings or shifts that I've experienced, not necessarily moments, right? I can talk about incredible moments, right? Like speaking at the Fed Up rally, on the national lawn with Greg, right? In front of thousands and thousands of people, right? Or, I can talk about moments that have been life-changing. But when I talk about like changing from the inside out, the way that I think, feel, and view things, people, systems, my work, my calling, those have been the two things that have been most impactful and carry me in the work that I do today, and the words that I use, and the panels or the podcasts or whatever it is that I agree to participate in. Those are the things that I fall back on.
That's amazing, and I didn't want to interrupt you. I may have been just kind of chortling or agreeing and laughing, but I just adore you, and that may sound patronizing, but I just love you, and I'm so grateful to have you with us in this space. And I think we could probably go on for another hour or two. I didn't realize you had a connection with Aaron Kucharski, and he has become. Well, because he's so involved with what we do, all the different states with rap, but with Virginia rap, he's there at our meetings almost every meeting. So I've gotten to know him very, very well, and really, really appreciated his experience. Well, experience, strength, and hope, but the knowledge too. All that comes with the experience. So I love that we have that extra connection I didn't know about. This world is really amazing. This recovery world. So I just want to shout out. I think Debbie Rosenbaum said thanks. Thank you, Justin. Debbie says, Mariel, God bless you, and thank you for sharing and giving others the hope and knowledge that people can and do recover, that life after addiction can be full and possible. You're an amazing face and voice of recovery. She also comments that we've had strong women on this week, and I didn't even realize that all of our guests this week had been women until she mentioned it. And as it turns out, we've had all women all week. That's amazing. Patrick Jones, going back to what you said, and this is funny because what Patrick Jones says, everything that was just said in the last 4 minutes, he's talking about when you were getting arrested around your recovery date and on all those feelings. He says, I can identify so much. That is my view on the justice system. Also, jail saved my life and gave me the time to focus on myself that I needed. And I relate to that comment. That when you were telling that story, I felt like you were telling my story. And the reason I find that particular, so I'm a person who likes to identify where the gaps are. And I had a Commonwealth's attorney. It's like a district attorney in another state, but we have Commonwealth's attorney here. We had the Richmond City Commonwealth's attorney on the show about a little over a year ago. And we were talking back and forth, and she asked me, Nathan, would you have found recovery if you hadn't gotten arrested? And I said, well, that's a loaded question because I don't know. There wasn't an alternative at the time. And since then, actually, I talked to her fairly regularly, and I've actually campaigned for her. So, I appreciate her and her work, but it was an important, I think, revelation on her part. I hope it was, and an important revelation on my part, understanding that there is an alternative, and we see that in Portugal, as we talk about, and we see that a little bit in what's going on with Oregon as we're discovering what's working and what's possibly not working as they look at the things that aren't being, it's not mandated, so people are just paying the $100 fine and going on with their day. But it's still taking the question of the public health issue out of the criminal justice system, and I have to applaud that. So we have a lot of work to do, and I love that we've got people like you out there fighting for recovery, telling your story bravely and honestly, and sharing that experience, sharing that hope shot that we talk about with the people. And so I'm really grateful that you're here. Thank you so much for coming today. I would love to continue forever, but I think we need to land the plane, as Justin and I always say. But Mariel, any final thoughts, any words you want to add before we close out?
No, I don't think so. It's been a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been fun.
Grace and grit. I'm going to write, I have a whiteboard in my office. You might see it sometime when we do meetings together, but I've added many quotes underneath, and I'm going to put you on there because I like that, grace and grit. And self-care too. I wrote self-care and circled that, and that's another conversation for another time. But because we could go for hours, but I want to know what you do for self-care. And so I think, I hope that, and it sounds like you've got a well-balanced existence up there. So anyway, I just want to say thank you, of course, to Justin and Derek behind the scenes here, to everybody listening. I want to also remind everybody, and thanks again, Mariel. This is the McShin Foundation's 17th anniversary. And so we've been doing this for 17 years, not the show, but the work that we do, here as a recovery community organization, providing same day authentic peer recovery support services, on-demand services. We have recovery residents. We have 12 of them here in the Richmond area. We currently have probably close to 130 individuals residing in our recovery residences, coming straight out of jail pods, coming straight off the street, coming out of the treatment center for Step Up. And so we, as John was talking yesterday at the community meeting, $135 a week for a Step Up House participant actually costs us $300 a week. I didn't know that number. And that to me is incredible. I mean, we balance our books because we keep the doors open and the lights on. But for 17 years we've been doing this. We've kept the doors open to the RCO and to the residences for every single day during the pandemic. We adapted and we accommodated. While the CSBs, which are our behavioral health centers, our governmental behavioral health centers here in Virginia, while they were closing their doors, while the treatment centers were turning away people, and while emergency departments were essentially treating and streeting or not even treating, we continued to maintain with our doors open. And I think it's a testament to the power of authentic recovery, but to people like Mariel, to people like, of course, John and Carol, who are in recovery and have an interest in seeing progress here, and to the people here at the McShin Foundation and other organizations like us. I mean, let's face it, we did a lot together, but non-governmental organizations, non-governmental agencies working together to make this happen. Well, the long and short of it, because I'm a long-winded guy sometimes. Sorry, Justin. Sorry, Mariel. We need funding. And for 17 years we've been doing this, we continue to need more money. And to make sure that we have the doors open, to make sure that we can maintain for the next pandemic or for the next situation that comes up. As you know, Mariel, 93,000 people dying of an overdose last year. That's 29%. 29% over the year before. In Virginia, we had a 40% increase from 1,700, I think, to 2,300 or 2,300. And looking at those numbers mean that we still have more to do. And I wonder what those numbers would look like if places like McShin weren't around, frankly. Down below, scrolling below, you can donate. Jump in there, donate to our 17th anniversary fund. Get in there, see if you can't help out. If you can't donate funds, that's fine too. We are always looking for socks. We're always looking for underwear for our participants coming out of jail, coming out of a situation where they don't have clean. I got here, I had a bag of clothes and I had a bag of food, and that was it, and they continue to feed me, help me to get resources that I needed. So if you can donate that, get in touch with us, see what we can do together. All that, man. We do a lot of cool stuff, and I really, really am grateful to see you, Mariel. I'll talk to you after this and for the next whatever meeting we've got next. Great to see you. Next week, we're going to have Kyle in the studio again. Kyle's going to be talking about his experience, strength, and hope, and we're going to see what some fresh newcomer wisdom we'll bring to the show. And Wednesday we got Women in Recovery, and Thursday's grab bag. We don't know what's going to happen Thursday yet, so could be something crazy. So check in, get in the herd, and we'll see you next week. Have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks again, Mariel.
Here at McShin, we believe in the McShin way, which is authentic recovery support service providers, people with lived experience, bringing that experience to those who need that lived experience in recovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in many things to support our mission. We believe in women empowerment.
What I love most about what we believe here at McShin is we believe in the authenticity of the peer-to-peer approach.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in giving people opportunity.
Here at McShin, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
At the McShin Foundation, we believe in helping people reach their full potential.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in multiple pathways to recovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in placing principles before personalities to help spread hope.
Here at McShin, we believe that recovery is possible and that any person seeking recovery can become a more acceptable, responsible, and productive member of society.
Here at the McShin Foundation, we believe in self-discovery.
Here at McShin, we believe in saving lives and offering second chances.
Here at McShin, we believe you can do this.
Here at McShin Foundation, we believe that we can only keep what we have by giving away, which is why we continue to help others like us seek and find recovery.